Welcome back to Definitive. Thank you very much. Remember to subscribe. I'm sure you already are. And happy Halloween. Trick or treat, I think, is the word to say for the world stage and for the global GDP. We'll have to see what happens. A lot of this depends on the delivery of GDP and how that's going to be achieved with economies that are slowing and or potentially slowing. Is this within what was expected, or is this too far out of range? And are the components to it the inflation that we're seeing as predicted, or are they slightly ahead of expectations as a result of second wave of COVID or vaccinations, different job issues popping up in the larger economies? So if we switch to what's going on in Glasgow, of course everybody knows COP26 and what's happening there, and the point is that we need better stewardship. We need to have a better response to how we're doing things. We need to see a better pollution control, and so energy will be in focus. And of course, this means that coal is largely in focus because it's often blamed as one of the most dirty polluters. And so despite that, though, you have two of the larger economies in the world using a lot of coal. One of them, of course, being the United States, which is lowered but now starting to kick back into coal. And then, of course, China, which has a lot of coal plants in process and building up. And the key there is that, well, they need the power. And if the world economies want to have goods, there's going to have to be a sacrifice, right? Many don't see it that way, and some would argue that it just can't be done with it, but it has been done, and so we'll see what happens there. So, of course, the other part to this is oil, and so if you look at regions like the Middle East, and if you look at Africa, which are large providers of oil, the U.S. has cut back on a lot of its oil. You do see future production of the oil in the U.S. From shale fracking. You do see a kind of an imbalance there, right? You know, if you look at Africa, Africa's a lot of resources, but not really using as much. You only have about a billion and a half people in Africa only, and so which is less than India, less than China, so certainly less than Asia. But you do see a lot of the resources for these other economies, in particular the United States, coming out of Africa. So there is now a new focus on an undeveloped land, that's Greenland, and so we'll see what happens with the development of the raw mining and materials coming out of Greenland. You can find more on that because you have people like Jeff Bezos, you have people like Bill Gates that are actually involved in this JV to do the mining for the precious materials needed for electric car batteries. And so that brings us to the next part of the equation with Glasgow. The world is ready to switch to electric, at least mentally. Physically, they're not yet ready to do that, and we have some examples of how that looks when it is attempted without the right process. So England's the most recent example in the UK after leaving Europe, and how switching very quickly from reliable sources to intermittent sources, renewable, and I think renewable should get a better branding, and something along the lines of sustainable, or maybe a slightly bit better branding. But it leads an example because it's simply, or appears to be, a replication of what was done in California and in Texas. So you had the United States in 1978 redoing its grid administration, or the rules to it, and then also a lot of actual physical demands on it. So the re-rigging of it, and that was done under a president who was a former Annapolis graduate and nuclear sub-school graduate under Hyman Rickover. So you had an electrical engineer or a nuke engineer who understood all the physics and the electronics behind this, and yet let people who were bureaucrats step in and handle the grid and how it should work without any real world application. And that, you might start to see a little bit of that in Europe. I mean, Boris, who has an interesting hairstyle, it certainly looks like the apropos caricature of one who were trying to do the grid in the UK. Now, so Glasgow will be interesting because you have the targets and many are not being met. The US is one of the few that's been meeting its carbon, and that was because of the gas. But that looks to be ending perhaps under the Biden administration. So we'll see what happens with hydrogen, and we'll see what happens and how this is going to move forward, and what will happen with coal and oil as well. And just to note, China and India both have been dramatically increasing the amount of coal they've been using this year and using it with the power. And Indonesia, their exports, they are a major coal exporter, have been going very strongly. So GDP for them may look good. However, for the rest of the world, and in terms of the shortages and the inflation and hyperinflation effects, as reflected by potentially the durable goods report that came out from the United States the other day, and the result on how this looks for the rest of Europe or rest of world in Europe, etc., will be a very interesting development. So energy and renewables, along with the batteries and electric powers. The electric power will give a very strong guidance for how things could look in the future. And what's interesting there is you need about 18 trillion over the next 10 years to get the grids converted to work as you want for the electrical demand that will be needed. And if you think about what's needed in Africa at something like 4 times the current amount, 4,000 times, you're not even close. So there has to be a realignment in thought, potentially towards nuclear. And yes, I know a lot of people are against it because of the waste, but if you think about the amount of oil waste and the amount of lives and deaths that have been caused and cancer that have been caused as a result of the petrochemicals, nuclear doesn't have anything close, even if you take in Chernobyl. So if you take Harrisburg, which happened in the US in the 80s or the 70s, and then if you take the Chernobyl, and then if you even take Fukushima, the deaths are certainly far less than what you've had with Exxon Valdez or the British Petroleum, Deepwater Horizon. You can go on and on with the amount of oil spills and the amount of deaths that have been caused as a result of that. So I think in terms of balancing it, you have to look at the nuclear, and as it is a very safe option when it's in operation, and the newer generations are even safer than the old. I think this will hopefully help in the guidance of the electrical demand and power needs that will be developed. Okay, thank you very much. I'll come back to you with more, and as always, subscribe. And hope you're having a great day and you've had a great fall. Thank you. Bye.